Hello everyone, this is Connor at BoatsDon'tSink here with another Shadowverse Evolve deck profile. This time we're going to be looking at the Tempo Forest deck, also commonly referred to as the Silver Bolt Forest deck. This deck's been doing really well in the regionals, both for the Umamusume CP01 format and now in the Bushiroad Springfest for the BP03 format. So I think it's a great one to talk about, and a deck that is pretty much going to keep being viable for a little while, just with some, upgrades and changes as we go. You'll see that a lot of this deck's core has actually even remained the same since set 1. This is one of the one decks that just sort of keeps getting upgrades instead of changing entirely. Before we look at the deck list, what is a Tempo deck? Why am I calling this Tempo Forest instead of Silverbolt Forest? So a Tempo deck is a deck on the aggro control spectrum. It's in the middle. It is leaning more toward aggro. So you're going to have basically an aggro deck with a lot of control aspects built into its aggro cards. So we'll see this in followers that either like deal damage or can bounce opponents' followers or like act as removal and aggro pieces. Whereas when we looked at the Abyss mid-range deck, mid-range is a more control deck where, it can be aggressive with its control pieces if they're left unchecked. So I like looking at this as a Tempo deck rather than just the Silverbolt deck, because while Silverbolt is typically your, big burn their face finisher, a lot of the deck's actual strategy more resembles an aggro deck with trying to get board presence, start attacking face as early as possible, and Silverbolt just happens to be the way that you deal that last chunk of damage a lot of the time. Now, looking at the actual deck list, as always, play the deck yourself, sleeve it up, make any changes that you find necessary for your meta or your playstyle. This one is a little bit less of a just sort of starting point. This is a list from the Houston Bushiroad Springfest. This is Dom's third place list. I picked this list because I think it's really good at just being a streamlined deck for people interested in the deck to pick up. It has lots of 3-ofs. It's really focused in on what the deck wants to do, which is a good point for people to pick it up, play around with it, and start making those sort of tech decisions and changes based on what they want instead of trying to play a deck that already has them in it. So, as always, play it for yourself, try it, but this is, I think, a really good list to start with. Obviously, it got third in Houston. So, 12 play sets is 36 of our cards, and then 2-ofs. We have a lot of 1-drops, and we'll see all the synergies with those. Really aggressive curve. You'll notice there is actually only one set 3 card, so this is very similar to the list that the deck was playing in the CP01 format. Even similar to the lists that were being played in set 1 and 2. Just sort of building on cards as new sets have come out. Evolve deck, very sort of straightforward for a deck like this. We're playing 2 Evolves for our 3-ofs, 1 Evolve for our 2-of, and 1 Bellringer Angel. As always, you can check the deck log page itself using the code in the bottom right. That is 5R2H. Now, looking at our deck, we can see, again, curve is super low. We have 15 1-drops, 11 2-drops. That's over half of our deck, almost 3/4 of our deck right there. And then we just sort of go into a bit of a top end where we can play like Rose Deer into Suzuka, into Rico, and sort of just curve that out to sort of finish the game once we're chunking away at our opponent's life over and over. We have 31 followers, 6 spells, 3 amulets. The spells, one of them is going to draw us cards, the other one's going to make use of those cards. And our 1 amulet is, or 3 amulets, 1 card, 3 copies. It's our draw engine. We do, obviously, any aggro deck needs fuel to keep going. It needs to be able to draw cards to keep pushing the opponent. And Silverbolt wants us to have a lot of cards in hand. So we need a draw engine there. Otherwise, really, if you're familiar with aggro decks, you can kind of just run out cards in this, and it'll make sense. But being a tempo deck, right, we're going to have sort of a lot more going on than just playing those cards and attacking. It's not as super straightforward as something like Heroic Sword might be. So first card we have is Bellringer Angel. Already, right away, a card that you might not see as much in aggro decks. It is a 1-drop, but it's a 0/2. It has Ward. Last words, draw a card. So this is a body that we can play down, and it can replace itself when it dies, which is going to help keep our hand healthy. Since it has Ward, it can block attacks. And as always, it evolves for 2 play points. On evolve, it can deal 2 to an enemy follower. So this is actually going to be really good in opposing aggro matchups, and even just sort of against, early game searchers or anything like that in sort of the mid-rangey matchups. This is very easily going to deal 2 to take out like an Iron Rot Defender or a Special Weak. Oftentimes, Bellringer will be able to answer one card, block another one with Ward, and still draw you a card back, which basically means it can be your first 2 or 3 turns, or impact the game on the first 2 or 3 turns, while not costing you really anything out of hand, which is great for a deck like this, where we want low-cost plays that aren't really affecting our resources. If you really want to, you can replace this with like a Goblin or Faria. Forest doesn't have any 1-drop 2/2s of its own, but there's plenty of neutral ones. You could also play the Water Fairy from the starter deck and replace the 1 Evolve with 1 Water Fairy Evolve. That card's going to let you, any of those options really are going to let you go face a little more if you want to play much more offensive instead of defensive compared to Bellringer Angel. You just have to note that you're not going to be getting that card back, so your Silver Bolts might start losing a little bit of value. Next, we have 3 copies of Elfchild May. This card's always been in Forest decks. 1-drop 1/1. Fanfare, deal 1 to an enemy follower. When this is returned to hand from your field, select an enemy follower on the field, deal it 1 damage. So this is on play and on bounce back. Deal 1. Makes it great removal. Obviously, your opponent plays an X1 on turn 1, you can just play this and kill it. There's not a whole lot of X1s seeing play right now, so I don't think that's going to happen super often. But in conjunction with, all of our cards we have that have bounce effects, Nature's Guidance can return this to hand, Ancient Elf, Marvelous Sunday, all those are going to be able to return this back to your hand for pretty cheap. You can start getting multiple triggers of May's effect in a single turn, which can be used to, remove 2 defense, 3 defense followers, or multiple followers across a board. When you start looking at Ancient Elf's Evolve, which also returns a card to your hand, you can get as many as 4 or 5 May triggers in a single turn, which is really good both against decks that play 1 follower that's big, or decks that go wide, since you're able to spread May's, 1 damage pings wherever you want. This is one of the big cards that's sort of going to establish this tempo archetype, where as we're playing our other cards, we're getting a value that's, disrupting our opponent's game plan, while we're also pushing them with, Ancient Elf can become a 5/5 that we'll look at. So that's threatening your opponent while also removing their board through May. Next, we have 3 copies of Shinko Windy. This is our most aggressively statted 1-drop, being a 2/1. Fanfare, look at the top card of your deck. You may put it on the top or bottom, or you may put it on the bottom, otherwise you're leaving it on top. This card is, again, just a great turn 1 play. This one's not disrupting our opponent as much, but it is good for controlling our own draws. Sometimes you might draw, a hand of all 1 and 2 drops, and you want to start, you're good for most of the game, so you might want to start digging for your Ricos, your Silver Bolts, or, you might already have a couple of those top-end cards and just want to make sure you don't draw another one. It's really great for that at basically no downside. Its forests, I think, only to attack 1-drop outside of neutral, so it's our best aggressive option. And its effect actually synergizes really well with the bounces as well. You don't always want to bounce this one as much as you want to bounce like May or Harvest Festival, but if you do bounce it, you can play it back down and get to sort of control your next draw, an additional time. 3 Nature's Guidance. This is just one of the core pieces of our deck. For 1 play point, you can return a card on your field to hand and draw a card. So that means that it replaces itself through the drawing a card, but also increases your hand size by 1 because of whatever it bounces. And the main things we're using this with are cards that have effects when bounced. So that's going to be Elfchild May, obviously. You can turn 1 if you play May, you can shoot something for 1. Turn 2, you can Nature's Guidance you can attack for 1, really, right? Nature's Guidance, pick it up, deal 1 more, draw a card, play the May back down using your second play point, deal another damage. So it's really good at enabling you to clear boards for cheap. Harvest Festival, whenever it leaves the field, you draw a card. So that turns Nature's Guidance into basically draw 2, right? You're using the 1 card out of your hand to return Harvest Festival to hand and draw 1 card for Nature's Guidance, 1 card for Harvest Festival. that's +2 to your hand size. Great card overall. It can also be used, you don't have to use it with these, right? It has value throughout the entire game. If you have followers with good fanfare effects, obviously we've looked at Shinko Windy, but Crystalia Tia makes a 4/4, Rose Tear gives you a Thornburst token. Those can both be reused by bouncing them back to hand with Nature's Guidance. Or, at our top end, we have Silent Suzuka and Riko Kashimoto that both have effects that allow them to attack the turn you play them, which means they can come down, attack, and then you can pick them back up to do the same thing the next turn. So, a lot of options with Nature's Guidance, and it's always going to keep your hand size healthy, which is really important when, again, a lot of the times our final chunk of damage will be through the Silver Bolt. Our last 1-drop is Harvest Festival. It's a 1-cost amulet. When this leaves the field, draw a card. Then you can pay 1, engage it, put it into Cemetery to give your leader +1 defense. In this deck specifically, we want to avoid doing that as often as possible. Since we have so many ways to pick it up and draw the extra card, we really want to be reusing that as many times as possible to keep a big hand size for our Silver Bolts, and just to have lots of things to keep pressuring our opponent with. Obviously, same cards as always that we can use to bounce this back to hand. Nature's Guidance, Ancient Elf, Marvelous Sunday. They're all great. You can curve, turn 1 Harvest Festival into turn 2 either of these followers. Is great for starting to establish board and be able to pressure your opponent. Because Ancient Elf can scale up in attack so quickly, it doesn't really matter if you're not getting that turn 1 follower into play, even though you want to have sort of an aggressive edge. Still fine to just draw extra cards, and then once Ancient Elf's a 5/5, you just kind of chunk them for like 3 followers worth of damage anyway. And again, since Silverbolt wants us to have lots of cards in hand, that makes Harvest Festival just even more important. Ancient Elf is our 2-drop follower. Again, set 1 staple. This card is just the biggest enabler for kind of all of Forest's shenanigans with wanting to bounce back to hand. 2-drop 2/2 with a Ward. So, again, good defensively as well. This is nice in sort of like the sword matchups, where early game, if you're buffing this, they might not be able to remove it easily. But I still wouldn't recommend just warding it immediately, unless you really need the defensive aspect. Since Ancient Elf can get rather large, and getting just ward after you've chunked your opponent for 5 is super valuable. So Fanfare, return another card from your field to hand, give this +1/+1. That makes it a 3/3 instantly, and it's going to be able to trigger any Elfchild, May, or Harvest Festival effects. Then you can evolve for 1 play point into a 3/3, which means 4/4 if you use to the Fanfare, and again return something to hand to get another +1/+1, which is going to trigger, even more effects, let you draw more cards, let you deal more damage, and be a 5/5. So really, this is a 3-cost 5/5, which is just absurd stat line. It is really good at starting to just chunk away your opponent's leader defense. Even just 1 hit can put them in a range where they're very threatened by some of your top-end pieces. And getting multiple hits in is basically a game ender. Crystalia Tia. This card is less important in this version of the deck than it is in some of the more aggressive builds we saw last set, where you were using like Gold City to enable combo 3 super easy and get like super wide boards. But it's still good here on turns that we go, say Harvest Festival, Nature's Guidance, draw 2 cards, play Crystalia Tia. For 4 play points, we get a 1/1 and Fanfare combo 3, summon a Crystalia Eve, which is a 4/4. So we're getting 5/5 of stats for effectively 4 play points, but you're also getting more value on top of that based on whatever those extra play points you spent were. So in that case, right, you're drawing 2 cards and getting 5/5 of stats for 4 play points, which is really good value. Tia can evolve for 1 play point into a 2/2. On evolve, you buff the Crystalia Eve +1/+1 and give it Rush. Which means now for an additional play point, say like 5 play points, we're getting 7/7 of stats that can all attack immediately. So this is super good for being able to clear threats on board, especially being able to put like the Tia in. If you can go like, say, Elfchild May, deal 1 to something, Nature's Guidance, bounce May, draw a card, deal 1 to it, play Tia as your third card, make the 4/4, evolve her, buff the Eve. The 2 damage from Tia attacking it can probably clear it, and then you still have a 5/5 left. Or if you just don't have to attack at all, you have 7/7 of stats on board that your opponent has to respond to. Or again, just like Ancient Elf, you start hitting them for these huge chunks of damage. It really quickly gets them into range where they have to worry about Silverbolt just killing them outright. Our next 2-drop follower is Marvelous Sunday. This is similar to Ancient Elf in that it's a way to trigger our return to hand effects. Fanfare, return a card on your field to hand, give your leader +2 defense. This is a 2/3, so it's not quite as aggressively statted as Ancient Elf, but being able to trigger our Elfchild May and Harvest Festivals, same as always, it's just super good. Being a 2-drop means you can curve these perfectly. Gaining 2 defense is still fine. While we are aggressive, we're not dedicated aggro. We do still need to be able to hold out against the aggro decks that are going to be a little faster than us. That's mainly like Abyss and Sword. Gaining 2 defense is great for that. And Marvelous Sunday can still be attacking for 2 damage. Since she has 3 defense, it's unlikely your opponent will be able to immediately remove her, unless they are like a more controlling deck. So the aggro decks are probably still taking at least 2, if not 4 damage from your Marvelous Sunday, in addition to you gaining the 2 defense and triggering effects. Our only new card from BP03 in this deck is Tweedledum Tweedledee. This is a 2-drop 2/2. This card is actually super important and super cool. It's why we play 15 1-drops. Only text on the base form is evolve for 1. It evolves into a 3/3. On evolve, look at the top 4 cards of your deck. You may reveal a cost 1 from among them, put it in hand, put the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order. So we have 5 different 1-drops at a playset each, makes 15 1-drops this card can grab. You're basically always going to hit. If you hit Nature's Guidance or Harvest Festival, you have, broken even on playing the Tweedledum Tweedledee into a card that will generate you even more card advantage. So not only is Tweedledum Tweedledee good for keeping your hand size, it can also be good for finding cards to increase it. Worst case, you're finding a Bellringer Angel that you can play defensively and will still replace itself. Or you're finding like May or Shinko Windy that can help you keep filling the board and pushing. And 3/3 is, it's not fantastic, but it is still on rate. You've paid 2 play points and an Evo point or 3 play points for this. So 2/2 into 3/3 is basically the same as all the 3/3s into 4/4s. Attacking for 3 is perfectly fine. If you can play this on turn 2 going second, it's still unlikely it gets answered unless your opponent... if they're on turn 3 going first afterwards, it's actually pretty unlikely anything they have can answer it, because that's still too early to be able to Dragon Warrior or anything like that unless they hit ramp. So you're probably getting 3 damage in with this as well, which again fits with our aggressive edge on our sort of card advantage and removal based tempo deck. So fantastic card overall. Even playing this out on turn 3 going first is fine. This can be like a follow-up to a Marvelous Sunday or Ancient Elf, and you just sort of keep building on your board, forcing your opponent to respond to it as you're hitting them and chipping them away. Asian Flash. This is maybe the most flexible slot in the deck, but most of the things you would consider playing here are all going to do roughly the same thing. So this is a 3-cost 3/3. It races, which is what our carrots in the Evolve deck are going to be for. On race, this gets +1/+1, and you return an enemy follower to its owner's hand. So you're getting a 4/4 and clearing something off the opponent's board. If you know me, you know that I'm not the biggest fan of putting followers back in the opponent's hand, because if they have fanfares or on evolve effects, letting the opponent reuse them can often be a pain. However, in a deck like this, where we are still pretty actively racing our opponent's life total, anything to set them back a turn and make them sort of redo what they had to already try to do can be pretty good at just getting, life chipped off their leader so we can get in range to just Silverbolt them for game. Some of the other options you could consider here, Rose Gardener from the starter deck is pretty much the same thing. 3/3 evolves for 1, so same cost as feeding. Is going to put it into a 4/4. On evolve, return an enemy follower to hand. The difference, Rose Gardener has combo 3 draw a card. So on the turns where you are able to play 2 cards before you evolve your Rose Gardener, or 3 cards before you evolve it. Rose Gardener herself can be the 3rd card. You get to draw an extra card, which keeps your hand size healthy. It has good synergy with Silverbolt. And, you know, it's still doing all the other things you want from Ancient Flash. Downsides are Ancient Flash is not evolved, so it beats Surefire Bullet. Surefire Bullet will deal 4 to Rose Gardener, but only 3 to Ancient Flash. And you lose the versatility of the carrots, which, since we're playing Shinko Windy and Marvelous Sunday, if you absolutely have to, you can use the carrots to race them in order to trade into an enemy follower. Whereas Rose Gardener can't do that, but you have the ability to potentially draw a card instead. The other option is Crystalia Lily, which is a card that has seen play pretty much as a 3 of in all the forest lists up until now. Problem here, the fanfare to look at top 2 and add a Crystallian or Pixie follower has no targets in this deck other than Crystalia Lily and the 2 copies of Crystalia Eve. So it's very likely to miss, meaning you're probably not going to get your cantrip anyway. And Crystalia Lily only has 2 attack. While her removal effect is by far the best out of all these options, it sends an enemy follower straight to the bottom of deck, meaning your opponent can't replay it. Only having 2 attack does make it less of a priority for the opponent to answer. It means that it's less likely to be able to chip away a more meaningful amount of damage on our opponent. So there's some trade-offs in all these places. I think because this deck wants to try to get the opponent into Silverbolt range or Rico range or Silent Suzuka range, just any kind of kill range as quickly as possible, Crystalia Lily is probably your worst option. Ancient Flash just provides the most versatility to the deck, and I think a lot of those reasons are why it ended up in this list that did so well. Moving into our 4 drops, we have Rose Deer. This is a 4/3 with Rush, meaning it can attack an enemy follower instantly, good for trading into whatever our opponent played. Fanfare put a Thornburst token into your EX area. So Thornburst is a 2-cost spell. Select an enemy leader or enemy follower on the field, deal it 3 damage and draw a card. So this can be removal or it can be face damage. Because Rose Deer also has Rush, this actually provides like a lot of versatility here. You can either put the Rose Deer and the Thornburst into your enemy's followers to either, take out 1 big threat or 2 small to medium threats. You can put the Rose Deer into an enemy follower and save the Thornburst for 3 face damage. Or, you can just save both of them and try to go face. If your opponent doesn't have a particularly threatening board state, you could just send 7 straight into them with these. Rose Deer is also just really good for this deck anyway. Despite being a 4-drop, which seems a little hefty for the deck, he's effectively a +2 in card advantage because he's giving you a Thornburst, so he's replacing himself. But the Thornburst is also drawing you a card, which means it's replacing itself. So you're basically getting to draw 2 free cards off of this. And since Thornburst does literally draw you a card, you're going hand size neutral as well, which, obviously, again, I've said this a million times in this deck because it is so important. Keeping our hand size healthy, at 6 or 7, hopefully, for Silverbolt is how we can close out the game from so far so safely. And Rose Deer playing into that just makes him a shoe-in for this deck. Even if you're just using him as removal, he just works super well with all these other cards. And, if you have the play points, like I mentioned on Nature's Guidance, you can use Nature's Guidance to bounce your Rose Deer back to hand as well, which gives you extra Thornbursts, which not only is extra reach on your opponent's life, is also potentially extra removal if you need it. So just lots of versatility here that you can use in whatever way you see fit. Our other 4-drop is Silence Suzuka. This one really is just straight finisher power. These next 3 cards we look at are kind of how you're usually going to be ending the game. Silent Suzuka is a 4-cost 4/1 with Storm, so it can go 4 face instantly, though it does die to basically, a stiff breeze at quick timing. However, it can evolve for 2 into a 5/2, still has Storm, needs a slightly stiffer breeze to knock it over, but still not great. Angelic Snipe's still going to remove it. But on evolve, you can top deck an enemy follower, which means wards aren't going to block your storm damage from going through. You can just top deck your opponent's ward and still hit them. The main times that this card is going to be super good If you're building your board, say you make a Crystalia Tia board where you get the 4-4 or the 5-5 and you have some other followers, it's pretty likely your opponent's going to have to spend all their resources on their turn to answer that board so they don't take a bunch of damage, and they're not going to be holding up quick timing removal. As soon as you catch your opponent in that position, you can play Silent Suzuka, evolve it, hit them for 5, they're not going to be able to stop her. And, even if they did end up with something on their board after answering your followers, you're just top decking it and they have to draw it again and reset up anyway. So you're both slowing your opponent down and chunking them for huge damage, and forcing them to spend at least part of their next turn answering your Silent Suzuka, or they're just going to take 5 more again. So this card really draws all the attention to itself and can really swing a game immediately, especially if you play multiple copies of it. And again, Nature's Guidance really showing its versatility here. There are turns where you can play Silent Suzuka, hit your opponent's face, and then just pick it back up with Nature's Guidance, so that you can do the exact same thing again the next turn. And it really makes your opponent kind of worry about how they're going to spend their turn in order to protect themselves from the inevitable 5 extra damage. So this card's just great at closing out games, period. Next, we have 2 copies of Riko Kashimoto. So this is a 6-drop 6/6 with Rush. It can't go face immediately, but that's perfectly fine. Rush means it can still swing at enemy followers, help clear them off the board. Strike. If you have no other followers on your field, if Riko's your only follower, you destroy an enemy follower and deal 3 damage to its leader. So if your opponent only has 1 follower, as long as you can swing at it, you can just destroy it with the effect. Your Riko, while it is engaged, will be unharmed. Your opponent will still have to answer a 6/6, and they're taking 3 damage to the face. Otherwise, you can clear 2 followers at once with Riko, which can, really valuable trade. You've got a 6/6 that cleared 2 followers and did 3 to your opponent's face. If Riko lives, this is perfect if you swing it like a Bellringer Angel. The Riko is still just a 6/6 at that point, but even if she lives as like a 6/3, 6/4 by attacking the smaller thing, your opponent still has to spend time answering her, because they don't want to take 6 or 9 more damage on the following turn. That basically loses them the game at that point. And Riko is really going to synergize with the rest of what we're trying to play, because if you're trying to keep a large hand size by only playing, say, like 1 follower a turn, say you've gone, an Ancient Elf into Ancient Flash bouncing their follower, into Rose Deer, into Silence Suzuka, and only just playing 1 card a turn, as long as your opponent answered that 1 card, you meet Riko's condition for no other followers. On the other hand, if you went the Crystalia Tia route and built a big wide board that your opponent had to answer, well, if they don't answer it, obviously you're just hitting them for a bunch of damage. But if they do answer it, you play down the Riko and you punish them for answering your board that way. So this card is just always sort of going to make your opponent wish they responded differently, even though it's always a win-win for you. So great card overall right there. Really critical in chipping away, 3 more damage, 6 more damage at a time to get our opponent into kill range. And once again, a card we can pick up with a Nature's Guidance. If you have 7 play points, you can play this, swing, pop 2 dudes, deal 3 to their face, and as long as Riko lives, you can pick it up to do it again next turn. Our last card here is Silverbolt, the sort of main iconic card of the deck. It's a 7-cost spell, quick timing, select an enemy leader or enemy follower, draw a card, then deal X damage to the selected enemy. X is the number of cards in your hand. So on a full grip, you're dealing 7. If it's your turn, you might actually be over hand size and be able to deal 8 or 9 damage. If it's your opponent's turn, obviously you're limited to 7. Even if you're only dealing 5 or 6, this card is still completely uninteractable. Since you're not attacking, this is just effect damage. Your opponent doesn't get quick timing of their own. Their wards aren't going to stop it, etc. It's really good at just killing an opponent out of nowhere. Since it's quick timing, that makes it actually even better. If your Silverbolt is ever not killing your opponent, obviously if it's going to kill them, just play it and kill them. But if it's not killing them, you can pass holding up the 7 play points. And if your opponent just moves to their end step at any point and you still haven't spent it, you can just shoot their face. And a lot of times, say they're at 15 life, if you have a full grip, you can wait until their end step, Silverbolt them for 7, next turn draw a card for turn, Silverbolt them for 8, and that kills them. With them getting like no timings in between to heal. However, if they play a big threat that's going to kill you, you can still use Silverbolt as a removal spell. It doesn't win you the game, but if the option was die or use it as a removal spell, we obviously are taking the latter. And Silverbolt on a full grip is 7 damage. That's enough to kill a triple raced Ogre Cap. So that's going to be a 10-7 coming at your face. So really, really good removal spell if you have to use it that way. And that kind of versatility just, again, makes it a super powerful card. And 3 of it because we want to draw it. It's, again, usually how we're killing our opponent and why we're focusing on keeping a good hand size. Looking at the deck as a whole, hopefully you can see just how synergistic everything is, how it all works together. Some of the pros behind the deck, right? You have tons of low-cost plays that generate card advantage, especially based around Harvest Festival, but also Nature's Guidance, Tweedledum, Tweedledee, etc. Bellringer Angel. We have a lot of ability to push damage quickly. In the early game, we have followers like Ancient Elf that scale very fast, and in the late game, we have Silence Suzuka, Rico, that can just immediately come down and start dealing damage. And a lot of our sources of damage to close out the game, our finishers, are all effect damage, meaning our opponent has no chance to respond to them. Either Rico's effect, or the Thorn Bursts, or just Silverbolt. All of these are effects that our opponent has no way to interact with. Downsides of the deck, since we are relying on a lot of synergies between multiple cards, sometimes we get bricky draws. Either you only draw ways to bounce, but nothing that you want to bounce, or things you want to bounce with no way to bounce them. Or, you know, you just draw 2 Silverbolts and not ways to draw cards. So that is an issue with the deck, and you'll probably hear a lot of Forest players say that, you know, if you lose, it was probably to yourself and not to your opponent's deck. You just lost to your deck drawing poorly. Which is a risk you have to take with a deck like this. The other kind of con is that Silverbolt, as our main win condition, is really bad if we run out of hand. Which, you know, again, can happen a lot if you don't hit Harvest Festival combos to draw a lot of cards. But also just in control-y matchups where the game's going to go longer, they might have a lot of heal, or they might have ways to make you discard cards, such as Dark Angel Olivia. That can really make your Silverbolt a lot worse as well. So here is, you know, the whole deck. Hopefully you have enjoyed sort of looking at all these interactions. Pretty straightforward list. I think it's really clean, really good place to just pick up and run with the deck. Congratulations to, you know, Dom for topping with this deck, but also everyone else that's played similar Forest lists. The Evolve deck, which, you know, again, we talked about some of the options you might want to swap out here and there. If you want to see the deck log page, copy it and try to make some changes for yourself, you can use the code in the bottom right, 5R2H. Otherwise, thank you for watching as always. I really enjoyed taking a look at this deck. Let me know if there's any others you want me to cover. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. I know there's a few decks people have requested that I'm currently in the process of getting videos put together on. But until then, you can watch some of the videos on the screen. There should be a few for you. And I'll see you next time.